It starts with one line that feels almost impossible to believe. Everything was scripted, even her emotions. Those were the quiet words of a man who had seen it all, the laughter, the tears, the charm, and finally realized none of it had ever been real. That man was Trevor Engelson, the Hollywood producer who once loved Meghan Markle long before she became a duchess, long before the tiaras, and long before the world turned her into either a saint or a villain. But now, at 48, Trevor has broken his silence. And what he said paints a portrait of a woman who didn't just act for the cameras, but for everyone, everywhere, all the time. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Imagine that. Imagine falling in love with someone only to find out that every Tinder gesture, every whispered, "I love you," every look across the dinner table, was part of a script, a role, a calculated performance crafted to achieve something greater than love itself. What would you do if you realized your marriage was an audition and you were never meant to be the star? Trevor Engelson's story doesn't start in bitterness. It starts in disbelief. He wasn't the man looking to expose or shame Meghan. He was the man left behind, quietly wondering when his real life had turned into a movie he didn't know he was acting in. And now, all these years later, he's ready to admit what truly happened. The actual reason he divorced Meghan Markle. But why now? Why, after more than a decade of silence, has Trevor decided to finally speak? Sources close to him say it's not about revenge. It's about release. About finally letting the world see what he saw. The woman behind the smile, the plan behind the romance, and the reality behind the performance. Let's rewind. Before the royal titles, before the red carpets, before the global obsession, Meghan Markle wasn't yet Meghan, Duchess of Sussex. She was an ambitious actress trying to make it in Hollywood. She was charming, beautiful, articulate, and always aware of how she looked when people were watching. Trevor met her at a time when she was still climbing, still molding herself into the version of Meghan she believed the world would love. To him, she was captivating, but also, as he would later admit, calculated in the most delicate ways. It wasn't the kind of calculation that screamed manipulation. It was subtle. She remembered every name, every useful contact, every favor. She knew which smiles to flash, which compliments to give, which stories made people adore her. Trevor saw it as drive. He admired it. But in hindsight, that admiration would become one of his biggest regrets. Friends of Trevor have since revealed that even in those early days, Meghan's behavior felt directed. There was a rhythm to her charm, a pattern to her words, like someone rehearsing lines they'd already perfected. One producer who knew them back then said, "You could tell when the camera wasn't on her, she'd shut down. It was like flipping a switch." But who was Meghan Markle before the fame? Was she always acting, or did Hollywood turn her into the woman Trevor now describes? Those who knew her in Toronto, during the Suits years, say she lived with intention. Every detail of her image meticulously controlled. From her handwriting to her Instagram captions, from the kind of people she was seen with to the charities she supported, everything had a purpose. Trevor, in contrast, was casual, laid back, the kind of Hollywood guy who liked authenticity more than ambition. He worked in production, understood the entertainment industry's games, but he didn't expect to play them at home. Their love story, on the surface, was a dream. A film producer meets an up-and-coming actress. They fall in love. They marry. Hollywood applauds. But behind the gloss, something colder was growing. A silent distance that no one could quite name at first. Trevor says it began small. The little things. Meghan's obsession with appearances. Her insistence that certain friends weren't on brand. Her habit of turning private moments into photo opportunities. One time, Trevor reportedly joked about how Meghan rehearsed her laugh before attending an event to make sure it was camera-friendly. She laughed off his teasing. But years later, Trevor says that moment haunted him. "That's when I realized," he said, "she laughed for the room, not for me." You see, when you're married to an actress, you expect a bit of drama. But you don't expect your entire life to become part of the show. Trevor began to feel that their marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a production. Every conversation had subtext. Every argument had timing. Every apology had motive. And that's when the confusion set in. Was she being herself, or was she playing a part she'd written for herself? He recalls a dinner where Meghan spent most of the night talking about her vision boards, pictures of luxury homes, high-profile charities, and magazine covers. When Trevor asked where their life fit into that vision, she smiled and said, "You'll see. We're going to make it." But that we, Trevor later realized, wasn't a team. It was a strategy. The truth is, Trevor was in love with a dreamer, but she was dreaming of a future that didn't include him for long. And deep down, he must have sensed it. Because when the cracks began to show, they weren't sudden. They were inevitable. He'd find her distant, detached, lost in thought, not about them, but about what came next. Fame was coming, and she could feel it. When she landed Suits, everything changed. The long-distance relationship began. She was in Toronto filming while he remained in Los Angeles producing. Their phone calls became shorter, colder, more scheduled. Trevor tried to visit, but Meghan was too busy. Friends noticed. They said Trevor's name came up less and less in her conversations. Her Instagram started to show a solo lifestyle. Yoga, friends, luxury, empowerment quotes, but never Trevor. And when he finally flew to see her, expecting to rekindle their connection, she greeted him with polite warmth, like greeting an old friend, not a husband. He described it later as like walking into a set where everyone knows their lines except you. It wasn't long before rumors began to spread, not of cheating, but of emotional abandonment. People whispered that Meghan was planning something bigger, a rebrand. Her PR team started polishing her image as a global humanitarian, not just a TV actress. Trevor began to realize he wasn't part of that narrative anymore. Then came the moment that broke him. A small, almost mundane thing, but one he'd never forget. He sent her one of his mother's rings, a family heirloom, as a token of love. Meghan mailed it back. No note, no explanation, just the ring. He told a close friend, "That's when I knew. It was over. No fights, no closure, just silence. Like the end of a scene, cut by an unseen director." The divorce papers arrived soon after. Short, cold, efficient. The same woman who once said she couldn't live without him now moved on without hesitation. And yet, years later, Trevor stayed quiet. He watched from afar as Meghan climbed higher, dating Prince Harry, becoming a global icon, redefining her image yet again. The woman who once rehearsed her laugh was now rehearsing for the world. And through it all, Trevor said nothing, not a word. Until now. Now, after years of silence, he finally confesses the truth that's haunted him since the day she walked away. Everything was scripted, even her emotions. It's not bitterness. It's not jealousy. It's resignation. From a man who finally saw that the woman he married never really existed outside the role she played. And the question that lingers for everyone listening to his words is chilling. If Meghan was acting all along, then who, exactly, was the real Meghan Markle? Because if Trevor's story is true, it changes everything, not just about their marriage, but about the woman the world thought they knew. And as his confession unfolds, one detail in particular stands out: the night in Jamaica, when everything finally fell apart. Because that was the night Trevor stopped being her husband and became her final audience. But what happened in Jamaica, and what Meghan did that no one could ever explain, would leave Trevor, and everyone who knew them, absolutely stunned. And that's where it all begins to unravel. It began like a script straight out of a romantic film. A rising actress, a charming Hollywood producer, palm trees, laughter, red carpets, champagne nights, everything the tabloids dream about when they write about true love in the city of stars. But Trevor Engelson says it was never real. Not in the way the world imagines. Not in the way love should be. From the very beginning, he once admitted to a friend, "It felt like I was watching a performance I didn't realize I had paid to see." Back then, Meghan Markle wasn't a duchess. She wasn't a global controversy or a royal headline. She was a hustling actress, hungry, clever, and desperate to make her mark in an industry that chews people up. She'd been doing bit roles, background appearances, commercials, and red carpet cameos no one remembered. But what made Meghan stand out wasn't her talent, it was her precision. Every step she took seemed planned, 3 moves ahead. Trevor met her during one of those dazzling Los Angeles circles where everyone knows everyone, where deals are made over sushi and smiles. He was producing independent films, charming, confident, the kind of man people liked instantly. Meghan caught his eye not because she was loud, but because she was deliberate. She made you feel seen. She leaned in when you spoke. She remembered every detail. She played sincerity like an instrument. Friends who saw them together said they were magnetic. Meghan, with her endless energy and ambition. Trevor, with his easy calm and success. But even in those early days, something about their chemistry seemed curated. As one acquaintance later put it, you could tell Meghan was shaping the narrative as it unfolded. Trevor didn't mind. At first, he admired it. He liked her drive, her fire, her ability to make a room stop when she entered. She talked about dreams, about impact, legacy, influence. She said she wanted to change the world, not just star in it. To a man who'd spent his career surrounded by shallow Hollywood egos, that passion felt refreshing. But behind that glow, there was something colder, quieter, and far more dangerous: control. Meghan controlled her words, her emotions, and eventually, Trevor himself. The first time Trevor noticed it, they were having dinner with friends in West Hollywood. A harmless night. Music, laughter, light conversation. Someone brought up relationships in the industry, how actors often lose themselves in fame. Meghan smiled, almost too perfectly, and said, "That's why I never lose myself. I build myself." It got a laugh from the table, but Trevor felt the line wasn't spontaneous. It sounded rehearsed. Even her jokes felt like lines from a script, one of their mutual friends later recalled. Like she'd practiced them in the mirror. Their relationship developed fast. Too fast. Within months, they were inseparable, or at least, that's how Meghan made it appear. She posted perfectly posed photos. She curated romantic captions. Their dates seemed choreographed. Dinner at the trendiest restaurant, public strolls just private enough to look candid. The tabloids didn't yet care about Meghan Markle, but she acted as though one day they would. Trevor, smitten, didn't see the patterns. He thought it was love. He didn't realize he was falling for a brand in the making. When he proposed, he did it from the heart. A quiet evening, champagne, laughter. Meghan cried, beautifully, as if lit by an invisible spotlight. He told friends later that she looked perfect, but the emotion felt muted. It was as if she knew exactly how to react, but not how to feel. Still, he dismissed the thought. Love blinds judgment, and in Hollywood, performance is part of the culture. Maybe she was just camera-ready, even in private. Maybe that's how actresses are. But something happened during their engagement that Trevor never forgot. Meghan started documenting everything: her wardrobe, her routines, her diet, her relationships. She began seeing image consultants, publicists, and stylists, not for her acting career, but for her personal brand. Trevor once joked, "You're preparing like you're running for office." She laughed, kissed him on the cheek, and said, "You never know who's watching." He thought she meant casting directors, but she was talking about the world. As the wedding approached, Trevor started feeling a strange sense of distance. Meghan was always on. During interviews or events, she'd hold his hand in public, tight, poised, perfect. But at home, that warmth disappeared. He'd find her scrolling her phone, analyzing her social posts, adjusting her persona. She could shift personalities like changing outfits, Trevor once remarked. One minute she's romantic, the next she's calculating. It wasn't random, it was rehearsed. When the wedding finally came, it was beautiful. A Caribbean beach in Jamaica, surrounded by friends and family. The sun, the sea, the laughter. It was everything a Hollywood romance should be. Yet, Trevor remembers standing there, watching her pose for photos, thinking, she's already somewhere else. Guests noticed, too. Meghan was radiant, but detached. It was like watching a bride acting in her own commercial, one guest later told a journalist. You could tell she was aware of every camera angle. After the vows, after the dancing, after the champagne toasts, Trevor finally had a quiet moment with her on the beach. He said he loved her. She smiled, beautiful but distant, and said softly, "You love who I am now, but I'm still becoming." At the time, it sounded poetic. But years later, Trevor would admit those words haunted him. Because the woman she became wasn't the woman he married. The early days of marriage were calm. They lived between Los Angeles and Toronto. He worked on films, she worked on Suits. Their schedules were chaotic but manageable. Yet, Trevor started noticing small changes. Meghan grew more conscious of who she was seen with. She cut off certain friends. She started aligning herself with influencers, activists, journalists, people who could build her image. Trevor wasn't against ambition. He was proud of her success. But love began to feel transactional. She'd measure people, he said. If they couldn't help her climb, they didn't matter. He tried to talk to her about it, asked if she could slow down, focus on them. But she'd smile, say she understood, then go back to planning her next step. It was as if she was building a brand first, a marriage second. There's a moment Trevor still remembers vividly, a dinner they had after she returned from a photo shoot. He told her he missed her, that things felt different. Meghan paused, then said, "This is the life we wanted, right?" He corrected her. "No, this is the life you wanted. I just wanted you." For a split second, her eyes softened. But just as quickly, the emotion vanished. She smiled again, the same rehearsed grin that had fooled so many. "Then support me," she whispered. "That's what love is." He supported her. He always did. But in doing so, he slowly disappeared. The truth is, Trevor's marriage wasn't a partnership. It was a performance contract. He was the audience. She was the actress. And as her fame grew, he started realizing he wasn't even in the frame anymore. People around them began to notice the cracks. "She was charming in public, but cold in private," said one acquaintance. Trevor looked like a man living next to a dream he couldn't wake up from. Their friends stopped calling it love. They called it marketing. Meghan's relationship became part of her career plan, another stepping stone. But the most haunting detail, Trevor would later reveal, came after their split. While cleaning out her old desk, he found pages of notes, not scripts, but reflections. Phrases like, "Be the vision," "Don't show anger," "Smile through tension." Lines that sounded less like advice and more like direction notes for life itself. That's when it hit him. Their entire relationship had been guided by invisible stage directions. Still, Trevor didn't hate her. He pitied her. She lived in character, he told a friend. I don't think she knew who she really was. And that pity would turn to pain as the years passed, when the same woman who walked away from him would soon capture the heart of a prince, rewriting her script on a global stage. But that part of the story comes later. For now, Trevor's revelation is simple, chilling, and unforgettable. Their so-called Hollywood love story was never love at all. It was the first draft of a performance that would soon go global. And just when Trevor thought things couldn't get colder, the next chapter of their marriage proved him wrong. When the cameras turned off, and the woman the world adored became someone he didn't recognize. Because what Meghan was behind closed doors would change everything he believed about love, trust, and truth itself. And what she hid from him was worse than any script could imagine. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It's easy to fall for the Meghan the world saw. The bright smile, the eloquent interviews, the perfect poise. But behind those doors, when the cameras stopped flashing and the audience went home, there was another version entirely. One Trevor Engelson would later describe as unrecognizable. He once told a close friend, "You know when you walk into a room and feel the temperature drop? That's what being around her off-camera was like." For the longest time, he couldn't explain it. 1 minute, Meghan would be warm, affectionate, almost magnetic, the kind of woman who made you feel like the only person in the world. The next, she'd be detached, silent, studying him with the same calm intensity an actress might use when preparing for a scene. And that's exactly what it was. Preparation. Trevor came to realize that for Meghan, every interaction was rehearsed. Every emotional exchange, calibrated. Even the smallest gestures carried intention. When she laughed, it was melodic, precise, symmetrical. When she frowned, it wasn't spontaneous. It was subtle enough to seem human, yet composed enough for a camera lens. In public, she was enchanting. In private, she was methodical. Their mornings together were routine, yoga, green juice, affirmations, emails. But something about her daily affirmations unsettled Trevor. Instead of phrases like, "I am loved," or "I am happy," Meghan's mirror notes read like directions. Be in control. Never let them see you doubt. Always stay composed. He once asked why she needed them. She smiled, kissed him lightly, and said, "It's not about believing in myself, Trevor. It's about maintaining the version people believe in." That line haunted him. Maintaining the version people believe in. Because what if the version wasn't just for Hollywood, but for him too? As months passed, that version began to dominate their marriage. Their conversations grew shorter. Their intimacy became rehearsed, predictable. Trevor felt like he was living with an actress who refused to break character, even in bed, even during fights. He once confided, "She had this way of turning emotion into control. If you argued, she didn't yell. She smiled. She waited. She observed how you reacted. Then she'd twist your words into something that made her look calm and me look irrational." It wasn't manipulation in the loud, dramatic sense. It was quiet, surgical, chilling. Friends who visited their home noticed how perfect everything seemed. The decor, the lighting, the aroma. Meghan's house looked like a magazine spread, but it felt staged. No fingerprints on glass. No clutter. No spontaneity. One friend described it best. It felt like a set designed to convince you that life inside was perfect. Trevor, meanwhile, began to feel invisible. He once compared their marriage to dating a ghost who smiles for photos. The more Meghan's star rose on Suits, the less real she became to him. She'd fly to Toronto for filming, surround herself with stylists and photographers, and return home radiating that artificial confidence Hollywood feeds on. Trevor tried to connect, to talk, to ask how she was coping with the distance. But she'd deflect, turning every serious talk into an opportunity to reframe the narrative. She had this incredible ability to make herself the hero of every story, Trevor said. If she forgot something, it was because she was overworked. If she hurt you, it was because she was misunderstood. There was always a reason, always a justification. And over time, Trevor realized he wasn't her partner. He was her mirror, someone to reflect back the image she wanted to see. It was subtle at first, then suffocating. When they hosted dinners, Meghan directed the evening like a film set. Where people sat, what topics were discussed, what music played. When Trevor tried to improvise or make a joke that wasn't in her tone, she'd give him a soft but unmistakable look, that "don't ruin the scene" look. One guest later said, "You could feel that everything revolved around Meghan's presence." Trevor faded into the background like a supporting actor. But Trevor didn't want to compete with her. He wanted to love her. The problem was, she didn't seem to need love. She needed control. There was one evening that defined it all. A friend of Trevor's visited unexpectedly while Meghan was home. The friend was casual, unpolished, jokingly chaotic, the kind of energy Meghan couldn't script. Meghan greeted him politely but coldly, and after he left, she turned to Trevor and said, "Please tell your friends to text before dropping by. I don't like unplanned energy." Unplanned energy. That phrase said everything. To Meghan, unpredictability was a threat. Authenticity was chaos. Everything, from emotions to guests, had to be curated. Trevor's breaking point came one night when he returned home early from a shoot. Meghan was sitting at her desk, not writing scripts, but what looked like a log. A journal. She quickly closed it when he entered. Curious, he asked what she was working on. She smiled, too quickly, and said it was just a personal project. Later that week, when she wasn't home, Trevor glanced through it. It wasn't a diary. It was a strategy guide. Each page contained observations about people, emotions, reactions. Notes like, Trevor responds to calm tone. Crying works when tension rises. Pause before showing anger. People reward consistency, not authenticity. Trevor said his hands shook reading it. "That's when I realized," he later told a friend, "I wasn't her husband. I was her experiment." The heartbreak wasn't just betrayal, it was existential. How do you grieve someone who never really existed? He confronted her gently, asked what the notes were for. Meghan didn't deny it. Instead, she flipped the script. She said it was part of her personal growth, that she wanted to master emotional intelligence. "Everyone takes notes about their career," she said. "I take notes about people." The explanation might have sounded reasonable, if it didn't feel like he was living inside one of those notes. From that point on, Trevor stopped believing her words. He began to observe her the way she had observed him. When she cried, he watched her eyes, too focused. When she laughed, he noticed the pause before it started. When she apologized, he timed the delivery. It was all structured, and once he saw the structure, he couldn't unsee it. Even their intimacy became eerie. Meghan treated physical affection like performance. Everything was graceful, delicate, even romantic, but devoid of vulnerability. It felt like passion without soul, motion without meaning. Trevor described it like being kissed by someone who's thinking about their next scene. As their distance grew, Meghan's social media presence exploded. She launched her lifestyle blog, The Tig, posting inspirational quotes, luxury products, and filtered glimpses into a perfect life. The irony was painful. Their real marriage was falling apart, while online, she was branding herself as a symbol of love and empowerment. He tried to talk to her one last time, to reach the real woman behind the image. He said, "Meg, can we just be us again? No cameras, no audience. Just us." She looked at him, emotionless, and said, "Trevor, this is who I am now." That night, Trevor slept on the couch. Not because they fought, but because the woman in the bedroom wasn't his wife anymore. In the weeks that followed, Meghan became increasingly distant. Calls went unanswered. Messages grew colder. When she returned from Toronto, she brought a new tone, rehearsed empathy. Phrases like, "I think we've evolved differently, and we're on different paths." Trevor felt helpless. He still loved her, but she no longer needed love. What she needed was narrative control. And when she ended things, she didn't scream or cry. She simply said, "I've already made peace with this." That was the most chilling part. Not that she left, but that she had emotionally left months before she physically walked away. Friends recall Trevor being shell-shocked. He kept saying she planned it, once said, that she rehearsed every step of their breakup. Behind closed doors, the woman no one saw had already written her exit scene. The rest of the world just didn't know it yet. But that exit, that calculated, quiet disappearance, would soon reveal something even darker. Because when Meghan finally walked away, she didn't just leave her husband. She left behind something that would later expose her entire strategy. A letter. And what was written inside that letter, cold, structured, emotionless, would change everything. Because for Trevor, it wasn't a goodbye. It was a script. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It was supposed to be paradise. The kind of place where love renews itself under the sun, where laughter feels effortless and the air itself seems to forgive whatever has gone wrong. For Trevor Engelson and Meghan Markle, Jamaica was meant to be a getaway, a reset. But instead, it became the scene of the quiet implosion of their marriage. Years later, when Trevor finally spoke about it, he didn't raise his voice or dramatize it. He said it plainly. "That's where it all fell apart. That was the moment I realized I was in love with a character, and she had finished the scene." The trip had been planned months in advance. Friends, family, colleagues, everyone expected it to be joyous. The island was warm, the sea turquoise, the drinks endless. Meghan had chosen the resort herself, not for romance, but for its aesthetic. She reportedly told a friend, "It photographs beautifully." And that, in hindsight, was the first warning sign. Trevor came with hope. He thought the sunshine would thaw the distance between them. He'd been trying to bridge the emotional canyon growing between them, believing that if they could just get away from the noise, the cameras, the schedules, the scripts, they'd find their way back to each other. But Meghan wasn't looking for connection. She was performing again. Witnesses at the resort remember how she carried herself differently, poised, alert, as if she was always conscious of being observed. Even when it was just the two of them, she seemed to be on. One evening, during a dinner by the beach, Trevor tried to bring up how distant they'd become. He talked about missing her, about feeling unseen. Meghan smiled, took a sip of her drink, and said, "You always make things sound so dramatic." He told her it wasn't drama, it was loneliness. She looked away, eyes tracing the horizon, and whispered, "You'll thank me one day." It was an odd response, detached and final. Later that night, Trevor watched her from across the patio as she laughed with friends. It wasn't the laughter he knew. It was sharper, louder, practiced. He noticed something else too. She avoided eye contact with him. Every time he tried to meet her gaze, she turned to someone else, changed the subject, or walked away. Something was shifting, or maybe it already had. One guest recalled, "You could feel the tension." Trevor was trying to hold the space, to reconnect, but Meghan looked like she was already gone. They had planned a couple's excursion the next morning, snorkeling, followed by lunch at a quiet cove. But Meghan declined last minute, saying she felt tired. Hours later, Trevor saw her at the resort bar, lively, surrounded by acquaintances. That was the first time he realized she was avoiding him. Not out of anger, but out of indifference. He confronted her that evening, asked her directly if she still wanted to be in the marriage. Her answer was eerily calm. I'm happy, Trevor. I just don't think we're the same people anymore. He said. Her words felt rehearsed, like a line she'd practiced, not one she'd felt. For the next 2 days, they barely spoke. Trevor stayed by the pool, staring at the water, trying to figure out when things had gone wrong. Meghan stayed busy. Photos, conversations, activities. To others, she seemed radiant. To him, she was unreachable. But the final moment, the one that would scar him forever, happened on their last morning. Trevor woke up to find her gone. The suitcase she'd packed the night before was missing. There was no note on the nightstand. No goodbye kiss. No sound. Just emptiness. He found her letter later that afternoon, tucked inside her pillowcase. It wasn't handwritten. It was printed. And it wasn't a love letter. It was a statement. I've realized we are on different paths, it read. I need to focus on my journey. You've been an important part of my growth, and I'll always be grateful for that. Trevor said the phrasing haunted him. Important part of my growth. It didn't sound like heartbreak. It sounded like a resume. No apology. No emotion. Just closure on her terms. When he showed the letter to a close friend, the friend asked, "Is this real? This sounds like a press release." Trevor just nodded. "That's because it is," he said. That moment broke something inside him. It wasn't just that she'd left. It was how cleanly she'd done it. How calculated. There were no messy tears, no confusion, no second thoughts. It was as if she'd already rehearsed this ending months earlier, maybe even while he was still trying to save them. And maybe she had. Because what no one knew then was that Meghan had already started redefining herself publicly. That same week, posts appeared on her social pages about new beginnings, self-empowerment, and trusting your path. They weren't about Trevor by name, but anyone who knew them could see the subtext. While Trevor was drowning in confusion, Meghan was rebranding her freedom. She returned to Toronto soon after, radiant, confident, and emotionally untouchable. Friends said she never spoke about the marriage again. She never blamed him, but she never mourned either. It was as if Trevor had been erased from her personal history. And that erasure wasn't accidental. Behind closed doors, Meghan had been building what insiders later called her transition phase, the months where she quietly shifted her identity from wife to independent brand. Emails surfaced later from that time, inquiries to stylists, photographers, and PR consultants. Not about acting jobs, but about positioning, about how to be seen, about how to tell her story. To Trevor, it was unthinkable. To Meghan, it was strategy. He didn't hear from her for weeks after Jamaica. When he did, it was through a mutual friend. Meghan had filed for divorce. The reason listed: irreconcilable differences. The paperwork was clean, emotionless, efficient. But what stunned Trevor most wasn't the divorce, it was the speed. She'd already set up the lawyers, filed the documents, and made arrangements before the trip. The Jamaica getaway, Trevor later realized, wasn't a reconciliation. It was a curtain call, a final act, and he had been the only one who didn't know the script. The people around Trevor said he changed after that. He withdrew. He stopped talking about her, stopped defending her when people asked questions. The heartbreak wasn't just romantic, it was existential. He looked like a man who'd seen behind the curtain, one friend said. Behind the curtain, that's where Meghan's real performance had taken place. Trevor later confessed that he didn't even know how to process what had happened. How do you grieve a marriage when you can't be sure the love was ever real? He replayed moments in his head, her smile, her laugh, her touch, and wondered which parts were genuine and which were rehearsed. It drove him mad for a while. The realization that the woman he thought he knew had been, in some way, a creation. But as he sat with the letter, rereading it again and again, a thought crystallized. If Meghan had been performing all along, then there must have been a script. And if there was a script, then someone must have helped her write it. That thought stayed with him for years. Because soon after, Trevor would find proof, tangible proof, that Meghan had been planning her next act long before she left. Hidden in her old belongings was something strange. A folder marked personal. Inside it, a series of printed documents. PR notes, rebranding outlines, contact lists. And in the middle of it all, one line that froze him completely. Separation narrative, self-discovery, and empowerment. No villains, no regrets. It wasn't just a divorce. It was a launch. Trevor realized then that Jamaica hadn't been the end of their love. It had been the beginning of Meghan's next story. The woman he married had closed her script, signed off her final scene, and walked into a new production, one where she would play her most ambitious role yet. But Trevor couldn't have known then that this wouldn't be the last time Meghan's narrative control would make headlines. Because when she entered the royal world, that same playbook would resurface, only this time, on a global stage. Still, before the world ever saw the royal wedding, before the headlines, before the documentaries, there was one more discovery Trevor made after Jamaica. Something she left behind that gave him the clearest glimpse into how calculated everything had been. It was hidden deep inside one of her storage boxes, a small, leather-bound notebook. And what was written inside would make Trevor realize he hadn't lost his wife. He'd been studying her creation, because inside that journal were notes so cold, so precise, that even he had to ask himself, had Meghan Markle ever truly felt love at all? But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. It's one thing to lose someone you love. It's another to realize you never truly knew them. Not their heart, not their voice, not even their handwriting. Because when Trevor Engelson discovered Meghan Markle's goodbye letter, it wasn't written by hand. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't even personal. It was typed, double-spaced, perfectly formatted. The kind of letter that doesn't bleed, it simply states. Trevor still remembers the weight of the paper. Smooth, crisp, professional, as if it had been printed straight from a PR office, not a broken heart. And that was exactly how Meghan wanted it to be. There were no smudges, no tears, no raw confessions. Just the sterile detachment of someone who had long rehearsed their exit. I've realized that we are walking separate paths, the first line read. Our journeys have brought us here for a reason. To learn, to grow, and to move forward independently. Trevor said reading that felt like reading a press release about his own heartbreak. It didn't say, I'm sorry. It didn't say, I love you. It said, move forward. Like a line pulled from a self-help blog, not a woman ending a marriage. He sat there in the silence of their apartment, the letter trembling in his hand, wondering how something that had once felt so real could die so cleanly. But the more he read, the clearer it became. Meghan hadn't written it for him. She had written it for the version of herself she wanted to be seen as. One paragraph stood out. I'm grateful for the experiences we shared and the lessons they've given me. You've been instrumental in helping me find my voice. Her voice. Not their voice. Not our life. Her voice. That was when Trevor realized this wasn't a goodbye letter. It was a rebranding statement. And that realization hit harder than the divorce itself. Because the Meghan he fell in love with would have written something messy, human, emotional. But this Meghan, the one who printed her farewell, was already somewhere else. Emotionally, strategically, spiritually gone. He read the last line over and over. I wish you peace as I begin this new chapter. Peace. Not forgiveness. Not reconciliation. Just peace. Trevor folded the letter and placed it on the counter. For hours, he sat there, motionless. The walls around him, once filled with laughter and music, felt hollow, like the set of a show that had been canceled. In the corner of the room was a framed photo of them, smiling, carefree, holding each other. It was from a trip to Santa Barbara years earlier. Trevor remembered how happy they'd seemed that day. But looking at it now, he wondered if she'd been smiling for him, or for the camera. And then, like a cruel twist of fate, he noticed something that made his stomach drop. The photo was signed. Not by both of them, by her. In neat cursive at the bottom corner. To our best chapter yet, Meghan. The irony stung. The woman who wrote, our best chapter, had just turned the page without him. In the days that followed, Trevor tried to process the breakup. He went through the motions, calling friends, packing boxes, returning wedding gifts. But nothing made sense. It wasn't that she'd left. It was how she'd left. He described it later as being fired from a job you didn't know was ending. And in a way, that's exactly what it was. Because as Trevor soon discovered, Meghan had already begun her next act, a carefully timed rollout of her new life. The day after he received the letter, Meghan posted a new entry on her lifestyle blog The Tig. The title? Reinvention. In it, she wrote about shedding old skin, embracing transformation, and becoming your own compass. Nowhere did she mention Trevor, but the timing was unmistakable. To the outside world, it looked like an inspirational post. To Trevor, it was her version of a goodbye press conference. And it didn't stop there. Within weeks, Meghan changed her public bio. She updated her headshots. She hired a new PR firm. Her friends said she spoke often about taking control of her narrative. Control. That word again. The word that had defined their marriage. Trevor realized that Meghan hadn't ended their relationship out of heartbreak. She had ended it out of strategy. It was part of a larger plan, one she'd been crafting quietly, meticulously, even while they were still together. One of Trevor's close friends later claimed that Meghan had been consulting with a media strategist in the months leading up to the split. Not about acting, but about personal positioning. Emails allegedly revealed topics like how to craft a self-empowered public image post-divorce, how to avoid negative press when separating from a Hollywood partner, how to pivot narrative from marriage to independence. Every detail matched Meghan's pattern, polished, premeditated, precise. And perhaps the most unsettling part? The tone of her goodbye letter matched the same phrasing from those professional templates. Trevor felt sick. Not angry, just hollow. He told a friend, "She didn't just leave me. She replaced our story with a script." For weeks, he replayed moments of their relationship in his mind, trying to pinpoint when she'd started planning her exit. He thought about the nights she stayed up late on her laptop, claiming she was writing scripts. The phone calls she took in private. The notebooks she kept locked in drawers. Maybe it had all been preparation. Maybe the marriage itself had been a stepping stone in the brand narrative of Meghan Markle. One night, after a few drinks, Trevor said something that stayed with the friend who heard it. He said, "She didn't fall out of love. She just finished the role." It was the kind of sentence that carried quiet devastation. Because how do you mourn a relationship when you realize your partner was never fully in it, just performing through it? And that letter, the cold, calculated goodbye, became the ultimate symbol of that performance. For Trevor, it was proof that everything had been planned. The timing, the tone, even the typography. He kept the letter for years, sealed in a drawer. Not out of nostalgia, but as evidence, a reminder that sometimes love doesn't die. It gets edited. And as painful as it was, that letter would eventually help him understand who Meghan truly was and what she was becoming. Because when she left him, she didn't walk away from love. She walked toward opportunity. Within months, her name began circulating in Hollywood gossip again. Not as the ex-wife of a producer, but as a reinvented woman, strong, independent, glowing. Her friends called it resilience. Trevor called it reinvention. And the cruelest part? She succeeded. Meghan's career blossomed. She became a media darling, landing interviews, endorsements, features. Her charm seemed reborn, softer, deeper, wiser. People admired her grace through hardship. But Trevor knew the truth. That grace wasn't born of hardship. It was built on a script, one she'd written herself, one that began with a letter typed on white paper. Still, he stayed silent. He didn't challenge her story. He didn't leak the letter. He didn't defend himself. Why? Because despite everything, he still loved her, or at least, the version of her he thought existed. But time has a way of peeling back illusions. And years later, when Meghan's life took another shocking turn, when she stepped into the royal spotlight, Trevor would finally recognize something hauntingly familiar in her new chapter. The speeches, the interviews, the carefully crafted outsider narrative. He had seen it all before. The woman who wrote that cold goodbye letter wasn't gone. She had simply upgraded her stage. And though Trevor tried to move on, the memory of that printed letter, that emotionless farewell, lingered like a ghost. Because he couldn't shake one question that burned through his mind every night. If love could be written in Time's New Roman, did it ever exist at all? But what came next, what he discovered buried among Meghan's old things, would take that heartbreak and turn it into something far more disturbing. Because tucked inside a box labeled Personal, Do Not Open, was a small, black-bound journal. And when Trevor read what was written inside, he finally understood everything. Because that journal didn't just explain who Meghan was. It revealed how she became her own creation. And it was worse than anyone could imagine. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. They say heartbreak changes people. But for Meghan Markle, heartbreak didn't break her, it built her. When Trevor Engelson read her goodbye letter, it felt like the end. But for Meghan, it was only the beginning. The start of a carefully orchestrated metamorphosis that would transform her from an ambitious actress into a brand, an icon, a phenomenon. Insiders would later call this phase the Hollywood rebrand. But to Trevor, It was the moment he realized that the woman he loved never simply moved on. She evolved strategically. And it began almost immediately. Within days of their separation, Meghan's energy shifted. Friends noticed that she wasn't mourning. She was recalibrating. She went from quiet isolation to polished activity. Meetings, photo shoots, charity events, networking dinners. Every move had purpose. Every step was part of a larger vision. While Trevor sat in his Los Angeles apartment, surrounded by boxes of memories, Meghan was sitting in a Toronto cafe, drafting emails to new PR agents. She was positioning herself for a comeback, not in film, but in image. One insider later recalled. She said she wanted to redefine herself as more than an actress. She wanted to be a voice, a global one. That's when the rebranding blueprint began to take shape. She updated her personal website. Gone were the red carpet photos, replaced by minimalist shots of her sipping tea, writing, meditating. The tagline read, "Be kind, be conscious, be the change." It looked innocent, inspirational even. But behind that simple rebrand was a strategy pulled straight from the Hollywood influencer playbook: authenticity as performance. Trevor's friends remember how surreal it felt. One week she was his wife. The next, she was a lifestyle guru. He would later admit, it was like watching someone erase you from their story in real time. She launched the TIG, her blog, part self-help journal, part luxury showcase, part manifesto. There were recipes, travel tips, reflections on self-love. But the real purpose wasn't to share her life, it was to curate it. Each post was perfectly worded, each photo filtered for organic imperfection. There was no chaos, no vulnerability, only aesthetic balance. The site became her new stage, and the world her new audience. Trevor noticed how she never mentioned the divorce. No sadness, no healing, no acknowledgement. Just growth. Every post carried the same tone, enlightenment without emotion. "I've learned that endings aren't failures, they're redirections," she wrote. To her followers, it sounded wise. To Trevor, it was chillingly familiar. The same polished detachment he saw in her goodbye letter was now being broadcast to the world, wrapped in empowerment quotes and golden lighting. And yet, Hollywood noticed. She began getting invitations to speak at small charity events and women's panels. Casting directors who once ignored her started calling again. She was no longer just an actress. She was an idea. The modern woman. Independent. Polished. Poised. That was the headline used in one of her early magazine profiles. But the truth behind the transformation was far less organic. Through industry whispers, Trevor learned that Meghan had hired a discreet branding consultant, someone known for reinventing rising stars whose careers had plateaued. The consultant's specialty? Narrative architecture. That's when Trevor realized what had really happened. Meghan hadn't healed from their marriage. She'd repurposed it. Everything about her new public image subtly reframed their divorce. She became the woman who found herself after leaving a man who didn't understand her. She didn't need to say Trevor's name. The implication did the work. Her audience didn't know the details, but they didn't need to. They filled in the blanks themselves. And Meghan knew exactly how to use that. She began appearing at charity events looking radiant, telling stories about trusting your journey and embracing independence. People clapped. Women admired her. Reporters started asking about her resilience. She smiled politely and replied, "Sometimes, life gives you detours that lead to your destiny." A perfect soundbite. Trevor saw those interviews and felt the sting of irony. Detours? Destiny? To him, she had simply walked away without explanation. But to the world, she was the heroine of her own story, graceful, brave, misunderstood. And then came the details that proved just how planned it all had been. Months after the divorce, Trevor was emptying an old storage unit they once shared. Inside a box marked personal projects, he found a thin binder. It wasn't labeled, but inside were pages of notes, typed outlines, timelines, and ideas. At first, he thought it was a script. But it wasn't a film. It was a strategy document. On the first page, post-separation image transition. Beneath that were bullet points, chillingly specific. Phase 1. Silence. Maintain dignity and composure. Phase 2. Empowerment. Emphasize growth and independence. Phase 3. Philanthropy. Link self-discovery to helping others. Phase 4. Reemergence. redefine self as global citizen. Trevor sat there in disbelief. It wasn't just that she'd planned her public reaction, she'd mapped it like a PR campaign. She hadn't just moved on emotionally, she'd engineered her reinvention. And she succeeded. Within a year, Meghan's blog grew exponentially. Brands reached out for partnerships. Magazines began to feature her as a modern feminist voice. She was photographed at red carpets again, this time not as a guest, but as a personality. Even her style evolved: softer colors, modest silhouettes, relatable luxury. Every detail of her presentation, her tone, her words, her wardrobe, had been recalibrated to evoke approachability. And that approachability was powerful. She became a brand built on two things: calculated vulnerability and visible virtue. Trevor later said, "She found the formula. If you make people believe you're authentic while staying in control, you can make them love you forever." But here's the irony. The same emotional precision that destroyed their marriage was now making her famous. While Trevor withdrew from the spotlight, Meghan chased it, but not recklessly. Every move was controlled. She didn't date publicly. She didn't gossip. She didn't lash out. She waited. She studied. She prepared. And then, as if by fate, or perhaps perfect timing, she met Prince Harry. It wasn't random. Through mutual friends, through circles that aligned perfectly with her growing humanitarian image, their paths crossed. And when they did, those who knew Meghan at the time said she was ready. Ready not just for love, but for her next script. Her rebrand from wife to star was complete. The Hollywood phase had served its purpose. It made her visible, credible, and marketable on a global scale. Trevor would later describe that realization as both devastating and enlightening. "She always wanted a bigger audience," he said quietly. "I just didn't realize she was rehearsing for royalty." And that's where it all connected. The goodbye letter, the emotional control, the blog, the reinvention. It wasn't just evolution. It was a career trajectory. Because while Trevor saw marriage as a bond, Meghan saw it as a season, a chapter in a story that always had another act waiting. He wasn't her partner. He was her plot point. But even then, Trevor tried to understand. He didn't hate her ambition. He admired it, even envied it. What haunted him wasn't that she became successful. It was how effortlessly she turned personal pain into public power. She had taken their failed marriage and turned it into a brand of resilience. And in doing so, erased him completely. But fate wasn't done with Trevor. Because as he began to move on, he stumbled across one final piece of their story, something hidden deep within that binder. At the back of the folder was a page titled Performance Notes. Written in Meghan's careful, clinical handwriting were lines like, "Emotion must serve purpose. Never cry without outcome. Authenticity sells better than apology." Trevor sat there staring at the words, realizing they weren't meant for acting classes. They were meant for life. And as the years passed, when Meghan's new life began to dominate global headlines, when her romance with Prince Harry became the story of the decade, those same principles would echo across every public appearance, every interview, every speech. Emotion must serve purpose. Authenticity sells better than apology. It wasn't coincidence. It was continuity. The same Meghan who had rebranded herself from wife to star was now preparing for her next transformation, from celebrity to royalty. But before that chapter began, there was one more discovery Trevor made, one that turned his quiet heartbreak into cold understanding. Inside another envelope, tucked between the strategy notes and image outlines, he found a small, leather-bound journal. It wasn't titled, just pages filled with observations, thoughts, emotional experiments. And on the very first page was a single sentence written in bold ink. "People love the version of you that makes them feel seen, not the one that sees them back." That was when Trevor finally understood. Meghan didn't fake love to be cruel. She did it to be admired, to be remembered, to be adored. And in that realization lay the most tragic truth of all. Because for Meghan, love was never about connection. It was about control. And for Trevor, the man who had once believed he was her home, that truth would haunt him forever. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. Because inside that journal, beyond the image plans and performance notes, was something even darker. Pages that detailed how she studied emotion itself. Not to feel it, but to master it. And once Trevor read those words, he knew the woman he'd married wasn't an actress anymore. She was the role itself. Trevor Engelson had seen a lot in Hollywood. He'd watched actors transform into other people on camera, only to return to themselves when the director yelled, "Cut." But when he opened Meghan Markle's journal, the one she'd left behind after their divorce, he realized there was no cut in her life. There was no line between the act and the actor. Because what Trevor found inside wasn't a diary of emotions, it was a manual for them. The small leather-bound notebook was unassuming, almost elegant. The kind of journal you might expect to find filled with poetry or memories. But when he flipped through its pages, the handwriting, neat, deliberate, controlled, revealed something entirely different. Each page was sectioned off with headers: emotional cues, behavioral reactions, situational responses. It read less like a diary, more like a study, a cold, systematic analysis of human emotion. On one page, she'd written, "When someone shows anger, match calm. Calm equals power. Use vulnerability sparingly. It triggers empathy, but loses value if overused. A smile is currency. Spend it wisely." Trevor sat in silence, reading line after line, feeling the air thicken around him. At first, he thought it was just an actress's notes, techniques for roles, maybe. But the examples were too personal, too specific. When Trevor gets quiet, offer comfort, not answers. He interprets silence as rejection. If conflict arises, cry within 30 seconds. Never shout. Men fear tears more than words. She was studying him. Their entire relationship, every argument, every reconciliation, every laugh, it was all documented, dissected, and filed like research material. He flipped another page and froze. People fall in love with predictability, create emotional patterns. Consistency builds trust. Trevor whispered to himself, "My God, she turned love into a system." What he was reading wasn't about connection. It was about control, a roadmap to manipulation disguised as understanding. And as he read on, the language grew colder. Emotion is energy. Direct it, don't feel it. Sympathy equals leverage. Authenticity should look effortless. Practice reactions in mirror. Trevor remembered moments that suddenly made sense. The way Meghan would pause before responding, how her tears came at perfect times, how her laughter never lingered too long. He used to think it was instinct. Now he realized it was rehearsal. She had been directing her own life the way a filmmaker controls a scene. Every word, every pause, every glance, calculated to evoke the perfect response. The further he read, the more disturbing it became. One section titled Social Strategy detailed how to navigate relationships. It included a list of types of people and how to manage them. Empaths, feed them inspiration. Cynics, disarm with humor. Leaders, flatter their influence. Partners, mirror their emotions until trust forms. Then lead. It was clinical, ruthless, almost corporate. Trevor began to shake. He realized that he wasn't the only one in that journal. There were notes about friends, colleagues, directors, journalists. She'd written about how to build alliances and exit relationships gracefully without emotional residue. In one chilling paragraph, she wrote, "People remember emotions, not facts. Make them feel, and they'll never question your story." That single line would stay with Trevor for years, because it explained everything. The charm, the charisma, the flawless composure. She didn't live her life, she directed it. He closed the journal halfway, trying to breathe, but curiosity, or maybe masochism, made him open it again. Near the back, under a section titled Transformation, there were fragments that read like a prophecy of her future. Next phase, global influence. Shift from entertainer to humanitarian. Authenticity through service. Marriage as legacy must align with brand values. Trevor felt the world tilt. She had written this before she met Prince Harry. She'd already envisioned the next act of her life, the elevation from Hollywood actress to global figure. It wasn't fate. It wasn't coincidence. It was design. He flipped another page, hands trembling. On it were sketches of ideas, small doodles, notes, and phrases underlined for emphasis. Public empathy equals long-term immunity. Royalty equals the ultimate character study. The world believes what feels true, not what is true. It was all there. The philosophy behind the Meghan Markle the world would later come to know: composed, misunderstood, polarizing, untouchable. Trevor realized the woman he'd once shared a home with wasn't documenting her emotions. She was building a mythology. And buried among those pages was one passage that broke him completely. Love is a transaction of perception. If they believe they're chosen, they'll never question being used. Trevor closed the book slowly, numb. The room felt smaller, darker. The memories that once warmed him now made him shiver. Every kiss, every embrace, every "I love you" suddenly replayed in his mind, not as moments of passion, but as scenes in a performance he hadn't realized he was part of. He wasn't angry. He was hollow. He whispered, "Was I ever loved? Or was I just part of the experiment?"